Hello, everybody. Welcome to this wonderful event celebrating The Doorman, a really fantastic new novel by our friend Chris Pavone. I'm Maria Semple. I'm a novelist. Maybe you've heard of my book, Where'd You Go, Bernadette? That's probably the one you would have heard of. And I'm a friend of Chris's who lives in a similarly, if dumpier, iconic New York apartment building, which you'll see some of it behind me. And I'm a huge fan of this book, and I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to share it and my friend Chris with all of you. So I'm going to just jump right in. But for those who don't know Chris, Chris Pavone's thrillers include The Expats, winner of both the Edgar and Anthony Awards, the instant bestseller Two Nights in Lisbon, and The Doorman, which published just this week. His novels have appeared on the bestseller list of the New York Times, USA Today, and the Wall Street Journal. They're in development for film and television, and they've been translated into more than 24 languages. Chris grew up in Brooklyn, graduated from Cornell, and worked as a book editor for nearly 2 decades. He lives in New York City. And I want to start from writer to writer to congratulate Chris on a rave review in the New York Times yesterday for his new book. I'm shocked he's not right now at the tattoo parlor getting the entire thing tattooed on his back, because it really isn't. It's like the kind of review that every author dreams of, and just a big, juicy, positive review. So, Chris, congratulations just on that king-making review.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now tell us about The Doorman. What's the elevator pitch, for instance?
The elevator pitch, The Doorman, it is very clear from the very first sentence that somebody is going to die in this book. Will it be Chicky, who's everybody's favorite doorman at the Bohemia, the world famous home of celebrities and financiers and the cultural elite of New York City? Will it maybe be Emily, the billionaire in the penthouse, or her loathsome husband? Or will it be Julian, the gallerist who's caught in between on the second floor? Or will it be some other really New Yorkie character in this novel that's about race and class and greed and ambition and sex and that thing that New Yorkers love to talk about above all other subjects, real estate?
Definitely. Look, I fell into the trap without even knowing it when we started. Yes, and so what inspired the book?
What inspired the book was moving into one of these buildings. You and I both live in buildings a few blocks apart on the Upper West Side of New York that were built in the late half of the 19th century. And they're spectacular buildings. And yours used to be a hotel. Mine used to be a rental building. They're both now sort of co-ops. And they both have staff. And I don't know about you, Maria, but I've never before lived with staff until I moved into this building. And there are a couple of dozen guys who work in this building. And there's a plumber, an electrician, and a bunch of porters, and a bunch of doormen, and guys who are here really to help the residents who live in the building, but also just to be humans who are out there, people you see every day, nice conversations you have, people who know you and your children. And as soon as we moved into this building, I started to become a little bit uncomfortable with the fact that all of these guys called me sir. And there was definitely a big class element to this relationship that we had. And that part made me uncomfortable. And I dealt with it by spending a lot of time really talking to these guys. And in particular, one of them named Johnny, who did weekday daytimes. And I saw Johnny every day. And we stood out there on the sidewalk talking about the Mets and the Yankees and softball and anti-inflammatories for our middle-aged man knees. Johnny was the type of character who everybody loved. You could feel his warmth from across the street. He was always happy to talk to everybody who lived in the building, and strangers and little kids and dogs. He was just out there in the world being nice to people all the time. And then he got sick and he left work for months to go get treatment. He had a very bad diagnosis, but all he wanted to do was come back to work. And for the next 2 years, he continued to work, hailing taxis and carrying bags and holding the door while also dying. And at the end of one shift, another doorman asked him how he was feeling. And he said, "I'm so tired, man." And he went home and he died.
Oh,
And he had plenty of time to plan for his memorial service. He knew he was dying for years. And what he decided to do was hold his memorial service a couple of blocks from our apartment building so that the people he worked for could most easily attend. And he lived his whole life on one block in Spanish Harlem. This job was the only job he ever had. He worked this job for 37 years, and he was buried in his full doorman uniform, complete with the cap on. The only non-regulation item was he had a New York Mets pin on his necktie. And that pin really broke my heart. And this entire Johnny broke my heart. And this type of relationship was something that even before he was dying, I realized I wanted to write about.
hmm. That's so interesting. And so you could have obviously gone a lot of different ways with that, with your relationship with Johnny. And so you turn it into this gigantic book about New York City, that it's been compared to the great Bonfire of the Vanities, and by Stephen King, Lee Childs, Griffin Dunn, and now the New York Times. And I think
Yeah.
when I first read it, I said, "Wow, you're doing a Bonfire of the Vanities." I mean, it's like you really took a big swing here. And so I'm wondering, you're okay. This is where everyone on the chat's going to say throw her out of the chat. I still don't know the difference between the mystery and a thriller and a suspense. And I feel like you've explained this to me, and I just don't know what it is. But can I say you've turned the love of this doorman into this huge kind of novel that just kind of takes on all New York in all of the difficult ways, and also into a mystery, thriller, suspense, however we're going to define it. How obvious or how hard was it to combine the genre that you're most comfortable with Johnny, and how did that come about?
Uh, Bonfire of the Vanities is a book about all the different issues, really, that are in New York. It's one of these great New York novels that combines all the things that consume us in a big city every day. It is about race. It is about racism. It's about class. It's about income inequality. It's about ambition and art and adultery and marriage and betrayal and sex, and even, like my book, about real estate to some extent. And I loved that book when it was written in the late 1980s. But I love it a lot less now. It hasn't aged that well. Our sensibilities have changed. And I really wanted to write a new type of Bonfire of the Vanities, a book that is about all of the issues in New York City, but also a book that is first and foremost, and from the very get-go, a thriller. And I'm not going to explain to you again, Maria, the difference between a thriller and a mystery, because it just doesn't matter. And I think people spend a lot of time parsing these categories for no good reason. I think the reading experience that you're looking for, or that you're getting here, is that that something bad is going to happen in this story. You don't
Right.
know what that bad thing is going to happen. You don't know when it's going to happen. You know somebody is going to die, but you don't know how or where, or most interestingly, I think, why. And this book is a journey into all of these issues that are about New York City, but is also into a journey into these relationships between a small handful of people whose lives are really, really different, but they intersect every day at this building. And that was a large part of my inspiration as well, because that's a big part of my life, that here in buildings like this, we see all sorts of people every day. We interact with each other every day. There are no gated communities in New York City. There are no exclusive suburban enclaves where the only people you ever see are exactly people like you. That's not how New York works. And because we're all elbow to elbow all of the time, we're also all in each other's politics and problems all the time. And I think that's one of the beauties about writing about New York, is you get to write about all of the problems.
hmm And are you always looking for for the suspense angle before you start writing a book? Do you know what I mean? Because like, I mean, it's a really compelling and sexy opening that you, like you say, that you know someone's going to die and you don't know who it is. I mean, that's so, you're just like it's a big book, but you're just like devouring it and just turning pages because you have this hanging over you. So are you always looking for that before you start writing?
Yes, I am. I'm always looking for it when I start writing, and I'm always looking for it on every page. I feel like it's part of my job, or the thing that I'm trying to accomplish, is to constantly be raising questions and withholding answers. And those questions don't need to be big questions. Those aren't questions like, has this guy driven his motorcycle off a cliff and will he survive? Like, that's a stupid question. And its answer to some extent might be exciting in the film, but it's not a real question about anything. There are ways to generate excitement and generate tension by raising questions that don't necessarily always have life or death stakes. I think one of the things that I try to accomplish writing suspense is to build suspense all the time by introducing characters and introducing problems, and to some extent refusing to give explanations until you absolutely need them.
And you know, you mentioned the just that there's satire in this book, and there's really wonderful satire. I mean, you just like take on some, you know, co-op boards and parent associations and these things that are just fantastic. And I mean, it just, I picture you writing it with just like a wicked glint in your eye and just like smiling and just for the pure amusement. It seemed like those were really fun to write. Were they fun? Were they difficult? What was it like to write the scathing satire of people like you in many ways, like of your own, of us, or maybe it was me personally you were satiring.
No, it was definitely not you. It was
Okay.
largely me. But I'll one of the things that I really did love about Bonfire of the Vanities, something I admired immensely about it, is that Tom Wolfe went after everybody. And I feel like if you are an equal opportunity offender, to some extent, you are neutral. You're not being more offensive to one person or another person. And it is simply out and out satire of the way we live now and the ridiculous things that we do. And I had a great amount of fun doing that. And to some extent, sometimes it felt to me like I was writing sort of like a Dave Chappelle, where I'm just going to take on everybody and everybody's going to yell at me. But then I realized that that was too much. And so I wrote a lot of material in this book that I ended up deleting. And a lot of it I deleted because it was not necessary to the plot. And because I write suspense fiction, plot is always foremost in my mind. And I always want to keep moving things forward. And there were a lot of scenes that I did write that I realized that I wrote purely for my own amusement. And if you're writing purely for your own amusement, the thing that you're writing is a diary. So I realized that I needed to excise that material, which was, again, a tremendous amount of it, and get back to the things that are important to the plot. And what I ended up realizing was that the various soapboxes that these characters get on about the various things that they think they should be fixed about the world, they are not there in and of themselves just to be there. They're there because they're the part of the plot. That the political disagreements, the social commentary, whatever you want to call it, all of that material is in this book, not because it is my particular opinion, but because it's part of the plot and it's what drives these characters forward onto this convergence of conflicts that ends with not all of them surviving.
And do you feel like that you have a main, like a main takeaway that you want readers to have with this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are all struggling with everything all the time, and I think to me, writing fiction is. This has been said before, and it's not an original thought. I will say it again. Writing fiction is a very long act of empathy, and I try to imagine myself as other people. And what would I do? And all of these characters in this book, the main ones who I like, and the minor ones who I like, and the minor ones who I hate, they are all confronting issues that I've tried to put myself into their position and ask, what would you do? And that is what I want readers to take away from this also. What would you do?
Yeah. I mean, I really felt that just because I related to so many of the people in the situations, and you made it so just um, it feels so immediate that you really can't help but try to go through your head of what you would do in that situation. So that, yeah, no, that's very cool. Um, okay, now we have so many amazing questions from the group out here, and I think that we should switch over to to these. Well, you know what? But before we do that, I have one thing that I want to ask you about, just about having writing a book that takes place in one day. What
Yeah,
did you like that? I wrote a book that takes place in one day. Today will
yeah.
be, and what did you find the challenges of that, or like when did that happen for you in terms of writing this book that you realized it would take place in a day?
I love stories that take place in a day. I love the immediacy of them. I love the pace. I love the opportunity that it gives you to have natural peaks and valleys. I think that valleys are very important in books in order to have peaks. I don't think you can keep a relentless pace for 10 to 15 hours of reading. And I think writing a book that takes place more or less in real time, it takes you as long to read it as the day does for these people, also allows the opportunity for backstory to fill in those moments when somebody's riding the subway and not a lot is going to otherwise happen. I love the structure of it. I love the constraints of it.
Mhm.
And I love the difficulty of it. It is really hard, and it's really hard to keep track of the timeline and to figure out where exactly things should go. And it's a lot of shooting yourself in the foot over and over again and dancing around saying, ow, 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 ow. But I also love things that are hard. I think that hard things are, in the end, much more enjoyable than easy things. I don't think the point of life is to be easy. I think it's for it to be fun and exciting. And I think writing a book that's hard to write is fun and exciting. And I love your book that took place in one day. And I love your book that you're writing now that takes place in New York City. Where did you get the idea to write a book that takes place in New York City? Was it simply moving into an apartment building?
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you. I have a book coming out in April called Go Gentle, that we won't talk too much about. But yeah, I moved to New York for about a year and a half ago, and felt, and I just feel like I have to get my inspiration from whatever happened 5 seconds ago, and like exactly the moment in time where I am. And so, not surprisingly, I have a woman my age who's divorced and recently divorced, with a daughter who moves into a famous building in New York. And then I just kind of took it from there. And
Yeah.
because it just, yeah. And so I feel like one of the things I did that was interesting is that, or that now that the book is out and it's being reflected back to me, is that I think that I really wrote it with kind of a recent arrival in New York's eyes, that I think a lot of jaded people in publishing read it and were like, "Well, how is it that you feel so positive about New York?" I'm just like, how did you do that? And I was like, oh, I just got here. I haven't turned on it yet. And so anyway, it was so I think I kind of captured that, the romanticism of just moving to New York. So yeah, but thank you. But we're here to talk about you. I'm gonna not. I feel like your face is forming into a follow-up question, and I will not allow it. Okay, so Jessica DeLillo asks, what is the best advice you have ever received?
Um, when I was a young man, first working in book publishing, I worked in book publishing for a couple of decades before I started writing. But I always wanted to be a novelist. And one of my very early jobs was a copy editor at Doubleday. And copy editors are primarily responsible for making sure that commas are in all the right places and that nothing is spelled wrong. And one of the jobs that I had, one of the assignments I was put on, was to help Pat Conroy bring a book called Beach Music across the finish line. And the book was very important to Doubleday, and it was extremely late. And Pat was rewriting the whole thing on yellow legal pad in what can only be described as chicken scratch. And he was living in San Francisco and not being fast enough about revising this book. So the publisher moved him almost forcibly from San Francisco to a hotel on the Upper East Side, where that he could work every day and somebody could check in on him as a type of babysitter. And that
Wow.
babysitter was me. And so for about a month, I began every day by walking from my crappy apartment on West 75th Street through Central Park to his hotel on East 76th Street and waiting until the crack of 9:01 so that I could knock on his door and take away yesterday's yellow pad chicken scratch. And I spent a lot of time with Pat during that month that he was going through these really complicated revisions. And I was somebody who wanted to be a writer. And here I was hanging out with this famous and very, very successful novelist. And all I wanted was some advice from him. And all he wanted to do was talk about me. He wanted to talk about my dating life. He wanted to talk about my crappy apartment. He wanted to talk about my family, whatever. Every time I tried to have a conversation with him, about writing, he turned it back to me. And it was very frustrating. At the end of our time together, we had one last walk through Central Park in the March drizzle. And he said, Pavone, he spoke Italian and he enjoyed my last name, which means peacock. And that's what he called me. Pavone, I know you want advice from me. So here it is. I'm going to give it to you. Listen to other people's stories. And then he turned to me for emphasis. And he said, listen carefully. And that was when I realized that the thing that he'd been doing the past month was not deflecting from talking about himself. He was working. He was working by collecting other people's stories, and I was the person at hand. And I don't know if he ever used my stories. And the thing is, I ended up realizing listening to other people's stories doesn't mean that you end up using their stories. It means that those are how you figure out how to invent other people's stories. And I realized that being a novelist isn't something you do simply when you're typing at a computer. It's something you do all the time. It's a way of moving through the world and listening carefully to other people's stories and what they're saying.
That's so interesting. John Gardner wrote The Art of Fiction, but there's also one, I feel like it's called How to Be a Novelist or something. And that he writes this, I don't know if you know about this, but he writes this page of what personality type you need, what's the personality you need to be a novelist. And I loved it. And it really is about, you have to be interested in other people. You have to ask questions. You have to be the person who always has an extra question. And then later I saw in an interview with him where he said, oh, that was just a joke. And I don't know why he said it was just a joke, because I actually was like taking notes on it when I wanted to be a novelist. And I actually was like, check, 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 check. Like, wow, I think I can be a novelist. Like, that you want to just talk about people after a party, nonstop. And it was these type of things. And I do think that that's very interesting about what Pat Conroy said, that and again, it's not like you're there to, like, as a vulture, like steal something, but it is just about how it's like how people behave. That has to be your fundamental, like, interest in life, is the behavior of other people, to be a novelist. Unrelated, did you listen to or read the Barbra Streisand memoir and her stuff about Pat Conroy?
No.
Oh my God.
Had to do with the movie, right?
Yeah, no, but she worked on the screenplay with him a lot. Mm-hmm. And she spent all this time with him, and it's really fantastic. It's a 800 maybe longer page book. So there's maybe like 100.
It's an infinitely long book, yes.
It's an infinitely long book. So the little Pat Conroy section is probably 100 pages, but it's really good. You should find it, or anyway, it's I would think it would be of particular interest to someone who knows Pat Conroy. Okay, Tanya Gillen asks, when starting a book, how do you start? From the first paragraph, or do you start writing and rearrange things to flow? Do you already know how the plot twists and turns will flow through the story?
I have a very specific process of starting a book, and it begins with this document I have that's been living on my computer for the past more than 15 years of book ideas. Oh. There are at this point somewhere like 25 of them, and some of them are really, really thin ideas. They're just a title, or they're just a situation, and some of them I've got a sentence or a paragraph, and some of them I've got a couple of pages. And when it's time to start writing a new book, I look over this material, which, by the way, I'm always adding to and deleting from and revising. It's a document I revisit at least every week in some way or another. And the more I can see a book clearly, the more material ends up being in this document about it. And when it's time to write a new book, I would look over this document and think, which of the books, which are the ideas that I can see most full and most clearly.
Mm.
And then I choose one. And then I do something very specific. I try to write flap copy. So
Oh,
this,
great
this
flap
is,
copy. It's really good flap copy. I
oh,
was
thank you. I,
noticing that today. It's so hard, everybody out there who doesn't know. The number of times you go back and forth and curse your editor or your editor's assistant or whoever is writing this crap, and then they go, well, then you write it if you're so smart, and then you can't write it, and you're suck, and all your friends get in and chip in and have it's such a mess. It's so hard. This is beautiful flap copy, Chris.
well, thank you. I don't know that what this flap copy was obviously a collaboration, but the flap copy that I write at the beginning of a book is not meant to be the flap copy on the finished book. What it's meant to be is a document that allows me or that forces me to articulate what this book is about, what's going to be good about it, why it should exist in the world. And flap copy can be many different things. Flap copy can be just a long description of the plot. If the plot is the main thing, it can focus on the protagonist. It can focus on a central conflict in the protagonist. But I sort of try to get everything into this document. Like, who is the protagonist? Who is the antagonist? What is the central conflict? What's the general shape of the story? What's the milieu? What are the main themes? How is it going to get resolved? And forcing myself to write all of these things into what's essentially one page is forcing me to figure out what the book really is. Because I don't know about you. I know that I have a lot of times in my head ideas floating around for what a book is. And I think that I see it clearly what the book is. But
Right.
then if you try to write it into a page, is when you can realize, wow, I thought I knew what this book is, but I don't have a plot. Or I have no idea like who the bad guy is, and I need a bad guy in this. And until I force myself to articulate this material clearly and specifically, I don't know that I have an actual book. I just have some part of a book. I have 6/10 of a book or whatever, but I don't have everything. So when I write that copy, that's when I have a book.
That's very interesting. Yeah, because I always feel like one of the important kind of signposts for me when I write a book is when like I have the platonic ideal of the book in my head, and like I get it. And like I don't know quite what it is. Like I don't know I'm gonna get there exactly, but there's just like a vibe that I'm like, wow, if I can do that really well, this is gonna be a great book. And that seems like what you're doing is you're kind of trying to like capture that early on in the process, which is just like just the perfect thrilling version of this, that if you can actually accomplish it, it would be a really satisfying read, right?
Exactly. And that document for me evolves over the course of writing a book. It doesn't remain exactly what it was, and it doesn't end up being the flap copy, but it is sort of a business plan for what this book is going to be. And, it takes 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 years to write a novel. And I sort of think it's a little bit insane to go into the process without a clear plan of what it's going to be. And some people can just start writing and get there by just feeling their way. But I don't feel like I'm one of those people, and especially because I like to have in my book, all of them, fairly big paradigm shifts. And those need to be plotted out for. And you had one of the best ones of all time in Where'd You Go, Bernadette, which is a book where you're cruising along in this book and you think you know as a reader exactly what's going on. And then in the middle of the book, you realize you're in a completely different book entirely. And that type of plot twist, I don't know how you came up with that, but I know that I can't stumble into that. That's something that needs to be planned from the get-go, or at least it does for me. And then I try to have a lot of different reveals and a lot of shifts of perspective in the book, or you think you know what's going on and you discover that you're wrong. And to me, I need to plan those out.
Right now, as you're writing, do you and then some big thing happens, you're like, you kind of get it and you're like, wait, this has to happen, or if it's combining characters, or it's like giving a character some backstory that's going to blow everyone's mind when they realize what it is, or all those big ideas you have and on the
Yeah.
walks or in the shower or whatever it is. Do you then go back and revise this paragraph?
Yeah.
Or like is that so the paragraph is like a living, breathing document, the whole process of your writing.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Oh,
I consulted on purpose, even when I don't have a new idea, just to remind myself, what are you trying to do here? Like, make sure you're still doing it. And I I find it very easy. I write every day. I leave my apartment with my computer. I put on real clothes. I go somewhere where I'm not going to be distracted by doing laundry or cooking dinner, and I write and I write and I write. And sometimes, if I'm not focused, I start going down a path that is really unproductive. And I start writing about a character's mother's backstory just because it's an idea that occurred to me. I'm like, I love this
yeah,
person. And then it takes me a few days to realize, oh my God, this doesn't belong in this book. And looking at this document on a regular basis helps me remember what it is, where I'm aiming, and what it is I'm trying to do. And also helps me focus on the themes that I want to explore. And for every book, even though my books are all suspense novels, they're all thrillers, they're also all about a theme or a few themes. And the last one, really, Two Nights in Lisbon, was very much a book about sexual dynamics and sexual assault. And that was a straight up thriller that centered around an act of violence and revenge and those themes. This book is very much about race and class and income inequality while also being a thriller. And to combine those things, I think for me at least, required a lot of focus and trying to remind myself, here's what you're trying to do. Make sure you're doing it. Make sure this is on every page. Make sure every page it's a thriller, and make sure on every page it's also about these other subjects.
Mm. Yeah, that's so interesting that you know. So the themes. See, I feel like I don't know what my themes are until I'm finished with the book,
Yeah,
and then I go back and I'm like, wait, I think this is what I'm writing about. And to me, that's one of the fun, like I'm just trying to make the plot work, and like what it inspires me. And then when I really read it through and I understand what the themes are, then I love doing the past for the themes. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Just to kind of really pull them together. But do you feel like you can articulate the themes in the beginning? Do you
yeah.
discover, oh, interesting. So even before you start, you can articulate the themes.
Yeah, they're purposeful. I remember a friend of mine telling me that it isn't until people explain her symbolism to her that she realizes what she wrote a book about. And
Exactly.
I thought that was, I mean, that I can understand that too, that what you're writing is a story about people and plot, and you probably don't articulate to yourself what the symbolism is or what the themes are. They're just there on the page because you haven't done the thing that I do, which is not to say you're not thinking about the themes all the time.
Right.
You just don't know that you're thinking about them.
Right. And
But
you're
if it
just
turns
thinking,
out you've written a book that's completely about five different types of marriage, and it's not until the end of the book that you realize, oh my God, I've written a book about marriage. You must have been doing it on purpose. You just didn't
right.
know you were doing it on purpose. Yeah.
That's right. And to me, that's one of the thrills, at least as someone who's not doing themes until the end, is that there are themes in the book. And then and if you take a month off and then you sit down and read it, there's just motifs, and whether it's just a lack of imagination, you're just repeating yourself about like imagery or something. You're like, wow, I feel like there's something going on here.
Do you
Um,
ever take some time off and read a draft of a book of yours and say, oh my God, this is fantastic?
you mean an old book
No,
or
no, the one you're working
oh,
on.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, oh yeah. I mean, I must say that that it's either like it's two things at once. I'd say it's why would anybody possibly be interested in this? Have I gone mad? And then it's like, oh my God, I think this might be really good. Oh gee, oh God. And it's like scary.
Yeah.
I'm like kind of scared at how good it is. And not that that's like an ego thing, but I do think that's necessary, to feel like, wow, and you like, I think you do want to, I think you have to love it, and feel like you're doing something big, big, and that's one of my things about novelists is that every novelist I talk to, they talk about their book and their themes, and it always just sounds so much more important than to me the book is. And I realize I do that too. And I just think it's like necessary. I think you really, I mean, what else is going to get you through the day? It's a really grandiose endeavor that you're consider yourself a novelist and are writing a novel, and I think you have to like sit there and think you're doing some big important thing. It's not like all day long you're thinking that you're going through life that way, but there's got to be this drive that's like, what I call it is like, wait till you get a load of this. Like it's that energy, that you're writing the wait till you get a load of this thing. And I think that's got to be there, to just fuel you. And why not? Not other people. No, nobody else needs to know about it. But now everyone knows that I think that about my writing. Whoops. But anyway.
Well, I think you have to. I mean, it's such a ridiculous thing that we do for a living. I mean, we sit around and we completely make things up, and it takes years for us to make up our story, and then we give our story to people and we expect them to pay us for it, and then we go to bookstores and we tell them about our story and we expect people to clap for us. It's just insane.
No, it is. It's so crazy. I mean, the odds of anything we think of any bookstore is so like we're just so lucky that we've beaten the odds on that. Okay, now it seems like so you write, you don't write every day, I know, but you go down 4 days a week, right? And you write, 'cause I know about Chris and other people.
When I'm writing, when I'm in the middle of a draft, I write. Sometimes I write 7 days a week. And for a long time, my wife and I have twin boys who are 21 years old. And for a lot of my life, I picked them up at school every day and I cooked dinner every night. And weekends were for baseball and doing other things. And I kept to a very regimented schedule. But they just finished their junior year in college and they haven't lived with us for 3 years now, full time. And now both of us work all the time because we have nothing better to do and we don't cook for each other. But my wife started a company and I work all the time, and I'm happy to work all the time now.
Right.
So I do it when I can, and I don't do it when I really don't want to. I don't, yeah.
And are there any, like, do you ever sit down and with, the dreaded, writer's block, not to call it that, to jinx it, but I mean, are you ever just stuck either just in a small way, like with a scene, or in just a cosmic way? And what happens when you feel that?
I'm stuck frequently. And I feel like for me, the being stuck almost always ends up being great. So what I do with being stuck is, instead of trying to write the next scene or the next chapter, I go back into a document that I call notes, and I just write about the character. And I just make up stuff that I don't intend to be in the book at all. This is when I start writing about a character's mother's first job. Things that, no, they're not going to be in the book at all. But they get me back into being with this person, this invented person, as a more whole person. And the more time I spend working on this stuff that is not meant to be in the book, the more I see clearly and feel clearly what this character is. And the more I get excited to get back in there, and the more it makes me able to make decisions about what to move forward with. I'm a big outliner. So I very often, I know what I should be doing in the next chapter and the chapter after that and 10 chapters on because I've outlined it. Sometimes, though, the outline really seems tedious. And sometimes I realize I really don't want to write this chapter. And I force myself to examine, why don't you want to write this chapter? And very often it's because I hadn't thought through clearly what it was doing there, and that it was just there to fill in the space between one piece of action happening and the next piece of action happening, and what happens if I just delete it. And that brings me to this interesting question that people are always talking about in fiction, especially in suspense fiction, is how do you keep the middle from being boring? And I feel like one of the ways that I go about it is I try not to have a middle. And that the middle, which, if we're talking about a book that has three acts, and the first is the introduction, and the second is the middle, and the third is the resolution, I try to have my act 2 be actually more like an act 3. that all of Act Two is aiming at something and it ends with something. It's just not the real end of the story. So that there's a
Exactly.
false
Right.
ending. So there's an introduction and then one ending and then another ending. And that third ending for a lot of my books, maybe all of them, but especially this one, that third act almost feels like a different book. That the time frame is compressed, that you now know everything you need to know about these characters. There's no more backstory. There's no more explaining anything. There's just a lot of action. And hopefully you're on the edge of your seat because you've become invested in these characters. And all along you've been known that it's coming towards something. And here is that thing. And it's sort of like a 5-minute rock and roll song that has 3.5, 4 minutes of verses and lyrics and chorus. And then that last minute is just an increasingly fast guitar solo. It's almost like a different piece of music, but the melody is the same, but the urgency is different.
Right, right. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think it's like what I do knowing that middle thing is hard is you just like really um like hammer yourself about are there twists and like real twists, like that's what I think you have to do is what I try to do in my middle is just write towards really good twists, and just like make a series of them, maybe or something. But yeah, no, that's really hard. And I think you have to really you got to have yourself on a really tight leash in that middle, and you have to like understand that that's the problem. I mean, that's like the trap that you can fall into is it just kind of meandering until you get to the good stuff, And so, yeah, yeah, exactly. I think that's really smart. Now, did you were a book editor, and so I'm wondering if your all your years in publishing, like how has that informed you, on the other side of, publishing, how has that informed you as an author?
I think that's why I write the flap copy first, is that
Oh,
I feel like I don't feel this way. I know this. Every book is going to live and die on a series of pitches. And if you're a first novelist, if you're a debut, if you're looking for an agent, the first pitch is the most obvious pitch. You're looking for an agent and you're writing a query letter. And that agent is going to ask to see your manuscript or not based on what you write in one page, what you write in 2 paragraphs. That's your chance. If you don't nail it there, they're not even going to take a look at it enough to reject it. They're just not going to take a look at it. The agent is then, once he signs you up, going to do a very similar thing, reaching out to editors. Here is the pitch. Do you want to see this? An editor, once she says, yes, I want to see this, and falls in love with it, is going to bring it into an editorial meeting. And the first thing she's going to do is stand there and give a 30-second or 1-minute pitch on what the book is. And the same thing is going to happen at the acquisitions meeting, at a marketing meeting, at a sales conference, when the publicist calls people, when the publicist writes a publicity letter, when the salespeople go out there into the world and try to put the book into the hands of accounts, when foreign agents try to sell it to foreign publishers. Everybody is going to do it on a 30-second or 1-minute or 1-page pitch. And if the book can't be pitched, then none of this can happen. And I don't feel like the pitching, for me at least, to begin writing the book, it's not the end pitching that I have in mind, but the pitching and the seeing clearly why this book should exist in the world are sort of the same thing. And if you can't articulate why a book should exist in the world, then it probably shouldn't. And I feel like I spent my whole adult life working in commercial publishing. And very often you can sit in a room and listen to somebody talking about a book and think, well, that's an interesting story, but that's a magazine article, or that's an interesting 5-minute conversation to have, but I certainly don't want to spend 12 hours in that world. And the idea of trying to figure out what a book, why it should exist in the world, what's the whole purpose of it, that's the thing that I take away from my years of working in publishing. And maybe that sounds very commercial. I don't think of it necessarily as a commercial bent that I have, but just a clarity of why are you going to ask people, first of all, to pay you for this? And then why are you going to ask readers to spend 10 to 15 hours of their lives in this thing? That's a big ask. And it's an increasingly big ask when people do lots of other things with their time. And there are 1 million books published in the United States every year. I think we all owe it to all readers to make those books the best that they can possibly be.
Wow, that's I think that's such good advice. I mean, I think a lot of people who want to be writers are, you know, I come across a lot of people that once I start to talk that way, they're like, I'm an artist. And it's like, no, you can be both. Like you have to be both. Like, okay. And if you need to be an artist to get you to the end of the first draft, that's great or whatever. But at some point, this other thing becomes real. And it doesn't mean that you're pandering or any of that stuff. It's just it's a reality and it's going to bite you at some point, you know, and either you're going to be working with it or it'll be working against you.
Yes, but artists of every sort also need to be able to articulate what it is that they're trying to do, what it is that they're communicating, what's the purpose of this, and whether you're a figurative painter or you're making films or trying to make the best television show ever made, whatever art you're doing, you need to pitch it to somebody, and I think the same is true for books as well.
Yeah. Now, Valerie Hoffman asks, what did you learn from writing this book? When and or what was your favorite experience while writing this book?
I'll answer the second part of that question because it was great. When I got finished books a couple of weeks ago, I inscribed one to all 25 guys who work in this building, and I put a post-it with each guy's name on the book, and I went down to their break room and I arranged the books on their dining table there for them all to pick up. And over the next day or two, every guy came out of the literal woodwork to shake my hand and pat me on the back and thank me. The book is dedicated to the memory of the doorman, Johnny, who died. And a lot of them were simply touched by that and touched by the fact that there's a book about them in a way. And, you know, the book is not actually about Johnny. It's not about the real life person, but I used a lot of his mannerisms and his way of being in the world as a basis for how this character was going to act. And I don't know that any of the people who work in the building have read any of it yet, but they were just so touched to see that I saw them and that I cared. And they, in turn, said extremely nice things to me about my family and our time here. And it was a moment that I would not have gotten if it were not for this book. And a moment that's also, I think, so rare in this world for people to be able to tell each other that they matter.
Oh, so beautiful. I think that's a beautiful note to end this on. I don't think we can get more fabulous than that. But before we go, I want to remind everybody that if you bought a book with a bundle ticket, it will be arriving at your place for in the next couple weeks. And really, to everybody, I just really encourage you to go out and buy a copy of this book. It's so fantastic. I go to your Barnes and Noble. Just Barnes and Nobles are getting really good now. I don't know if anyone's noticed this, but they are like really on fire. Every Barnes and Noble I'm going to just seems to be getting redone and hipper and smarter and a better experience. I feel like it's just such a thrilling thing to just go into new Barnes and Nobles and get my mind blown. And next time, and if you don't believe me, go into a Barnes and Noble, and when you're there, buy this fantastic novel. You will devour it and want your book group to be reading it and discuss with all your friends deep into wine hour. So thank you very much. Chris, wonderful to see you. I'll see you around the hood.
Maria, thank you so much for doing this. This has been a real pleasure. You are exactly as great as I was expecting you to be.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. It was really fun. Thanks for being out there. Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.